Anyway, we're rolling.
Sweet.
Matt, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. What can you tell me about yourself and what you do here in Bozeman?
Oh, probably first off, manage a house with three kids, three boys under 9 in it. So we've got a 9-year-old and 2 5-year-olds. So that is probably obviously the priority, but also, um, where probably the most mental energy is spent. Beyond that, let's see, we moved back 5 years ago, in real estate with Bozeman Real Estate Group. And that was after 6 years of real estate in Minnesota. In the long family history of real estate back in Missouri, where I grew up, and then where my grandmother started a brokerage, and my dad ran that for a couple decades, and before he retired. Um, but here in Bozeman, it's building the business. It was, as we've talked about before, kind of in our previous conversation, we moved back 5 years ago, starting over from scratch. I've been in and out of Bozeman for a long time, and went to MSU in the early 2000s. My sisters moved up here in mid 90s. My dad's out here now, and we decided as a family, when the twins came, that we needed more family. And so we moved back, and that was part of the piece, is moving back to build the life that we want. And so kind of not necessarily on a complete whim, but after 6 months of conversations, we pulled the trigger and moved and rebuilt my business here. From kind of scratch, and started that over.
How was that process? Was it harder than you thought? Easy?
It,
Without, if you don't mind me aging you,
no.
how old were you when you did that?
Oh, so I'm 43 now. So I was 38, roughly. And, we had a good life. I had a successful real estate practice in Minnesota. My wife had a very successful mental health practice as a private practice counselor and therapist. But it was kind of one of those decisions of like, what's best for our kids, what's best for our life. And it all came up because we were out here a couple times a year visiting my family. Spent most of our vacation time out here, and we were on a hike, and my wife asked, would you ever move back? And I said, yeah. And 6 months later, we were here. In the process, I look at it like it was stressful. Like, we burnt through all of our savings rebuilding the business. We were down to our last mortgage payment, like all those, the typical stories that business owners have. And I don't really necessarily look back on it being hard. I was actually having a conversation with a buddy in a men's group that I'm in, about how, the stress that comes up in my mind, around finances and things like that necessarily aren't mine or in my control. It's money that I'm been able to earn, that I'm there to steward. How much stress that creates in a day-to-day based with like image or those types of things. Whereas uprooting the family and moving across the country, starting over, didn't really seem hard. And I don't know why. And I think that's just part of not being really risk adverse, and knowing it was the right decision. But it was taxing on the family for sure. It's a lot of sleepless nights and figuring it out, and wondering when that paycheck's going to come in, or the next commission, or that kind of deal, and trying to figure out how to build the community around it and all those pieces.
Can you speak more to the finance? I think a lot of people, and myself included, can relate.
Yeah.
Like, even for me personally now more than ever.
Yeah.
But it's very real.
And I remember I had a conversation with my dad, and my whole family self-employed. My sister had a catering business here, in the Valley for a long time, and sold that a couple of years ago. My wife's side of the family, they've got a 3rd generation manufacturing business. So everybody we're surrounded with is self-employed. And I remember years ago in Minnesota, my business had started doing well, and my dad and I were having a conversation. He's like, you seem really stressed, but business is good. And I said, yeah, but I'm still worried, about the money. And there's this thought in my mind that I've always increased my business every year. I've been very fortunate that, whether it was Minnesota or here, but there's always this kind of thought in my mind that like, oh, last year was a fluke, that's that self-doubt that is always there. And I think a ton of that in my security plays into the finances. And it's not necessarily a greed or never enough type thing. It's just, it's expensive having a family of 5, and particularly here in Bozeman. And so that worry is always there. But the piece that I was having a conversation with my buddy about the other morning was, I have pretty strong faith. And in that faith, I believe that God has given me, a lot of opportunity to create wealth and in finances, and part of my role in that is it's not mine to control. It's mine to steward, and that's how we manage our family finances and how we manage our gifting and in the organizations that we support. Um, but for some reason, for me too, it's my constant worry. Is it, even though I have X amount of savings for our monthly budget, like it's always, once I get that savings buffer and finally after years of rebuilding, getting that spot where we were somewhat comfortable, my mind automatically goes to like, well, what about 4 months from now? What about, that? And I think it's the struggle that a lot of us have that own businesses is it going to keep going?
Yeah, the reason I ask if you could reiterate on it, I've heard that from more people, and it's almost surprised me. People that could seem outwardly very successful career-wise or just monetarily.
Yep.
But I think it's a very common human thing to have that.
Yeah, and it seems to be the big area of my life where every time that we've gotten down to almost no money, which has happened several times throughout my adult life of business, and it's always been okay. Like we've always figured it out, and whether that's through the right opportunity or the right thing showing up, or like this past experience was, I can't remember, a year or two ago in that rebuild process of burning through our savings on the move out. Like we were down to our last mortgage payment. And, I think I ended up having 2 closings that week, like 2 or 3 days before that mortgage payment was due.
You're saying down to your last payment, meaning it's due and you don't have enough to cover it?
We had just enough, like, and a little bit more probably to buy a couple weeks worth of groceries over that mortgage payment. And, but then those closings came in that week and that bought us, a couple months buffer on that. And, but my mind always plays that trick of like, it's last year's success was just a fluke. It's going to come crashing down next year, kind of thing. And I've yet to have any experience that proves that thought in my mind right. Like it's just that little needle that keeps poking.
Hi, folks. Quick note from me. If you don't already know, the goal of Mountain Mule Media is to build real connection between Montana's businesses and the people they serve. If this episode or any other has given you something worth thinking about, smiling at, or passing along, I've got a small ask. Share it with a friend, text it to someone, post it in your story. That one simple action helps these businesses get seen, grow, and thrive, and it helps this show keep going. Thank you for supporting these Montana businesses. Now back to the show. We have a mutual friend, Nick. Have you guys talked about Profit First, or do you use that at all?
Yes. And I have, I've used that kind of model for years, kind of off and on. Like I think for a lot of us, we, at least for me, I struggle with discipline in that area of just using it on a monthly basis versus like, oh, I got to get back to that. And it's been 2 months kind of deal. And then I have a local financial planner here who built his own kind of version of that and sets up our accounts in a certain way that really changed our way that we manage our money.
Yeah.
And he looks at it from more of that cash flow perspective versus just income. So it's, we have a separate account that is purely our personal budget monthly. We have an account that our income comes into and holds, and then we just transfer that account each month. And that allows us to not spend off of the bigger account where we look at the budget and be like, oh, no, we're fine. We can buy that. It actually helps us stay more on track.
I'd imagine every industry is going to be different, but with real estate, it's a little bit more tricky just given the inconsistency of the.
Yeah. I made probably 80% of this year's income in 2 different 3-week spans. There was fairly consistent income almost each month. I think maybe 1 month that I didn't have a transaction, but there were, I can look back this year and there's 2 specific periods where it was, 80% of our income was made. So then it's how do we stay diligent with budgeting that and balancing it? And just because we have a big month that we don't blow through it.
Yeah. So in June of this year, I started using Profit First, and I literally full send with it. Just like read and copied and did everything. And I could not, recommend it to so many people and even to my industry, because there's 6 months just with the seasonality of tourism. The 6 months could be, like well over 75% of the
Yep,
annual income.
exactly.
And to plan for those peaks and valleys is,
It's tough, and real estate is always cyclical, and really any sales is potentially, but for real, you hear so many agents, because I think the stat is it's like 9 out of 10 agents that start make it to 2 years in the business and fail out. And I think part of that is they don't understand that they have to run it like a business. They get a commission check and they think they just take that home. They don't think about paying quarterlies. They don't think about any of that or the business expenses that come out of it. And so we have a very structured way that every check that comes in gets broken into certain accounts immediately and distributed. So it's not just, one account piling up.
yeah, it's very misleading
Mm-hmm.
when you're in the busy time of the year, and you do get delusional in the wrong sense, and the emotion of it, it's exciting. Like, look at this is great.
Yep.
But you got to have that, I don't know, the foresight. And I just love that system because it takes the emotion out of it. This is the system.
Yeah. And it puts those kind of hard stops in place of, one of the things that I have a really hard time doing is rewarding myself. Like it's one of the planners that I use kind of that does some goal setting. Each of those goals is like, okay, when you accomplish this, how are you going to celebrate? And I always stare at those lines and I don't know how to do that. And I look at this year where we were very fortunate in our year, and there had been a handful of things that I've been putting off purchasing because we had other important needs that became a priority prior to those things, and was able to finally purchase some things that I've been wanting for a while, and new rifle and those kind of things. So
yeah, you and me both. So I have no excuse after Q4. There should be some new cameras in this studio because that's, it's a reward, but this is fun. And I just, but I kept saying it was after Q3 and I was like, oh, anyway, yeah. I hear you.
I feel like you get to that spot too, where it's like, there are certain things that I would see as a reward that I would kind of potentially buy anyway. I've gone through this cycle. I was talking to a buddy about this too, of like, I remember when a $20 purchase was a big thing. I remember when a $100 purchase was a big thing. And I remember when a $500 purchase was a big thing. And I remember we've reset that multiple times now. And so it's that baseline, no matter how much income I think you create, that baseline can always get raised. And then for us, the upper, we've got the fear that I have around our food budget, and watching my 9-year-old eat a pound of ground beef at taco night, and looking 5 years from now where it's taco night's going to be 6 pounds of ground beef every time, and like how that just grows exponentially as these boys grow, and all that fun stuff that we get to look forward to. So
that's funny. That's the one place where I really try not to hold back, is with food, just eating good food. And I'm like, if I work this hard in this many hours, like I'm not going to put shit in my body. Yeah. I'm going to eat something 100%. Good, but it adds up.
Oh yeah. And my wife, she's an athlete, a amateur, I would call her a high level amateur endurance athlete. So she's competes in Ironmans quite a bit, and I work out quite a bit. And so, yeah, we're always looking at that fuel and how to, balance that. But then we look too, it's like, we want to feed our kids well, but the last thing I want is create spoiled kids. And so I don't want them eating ribeye every night, and getting used to that as the expectation. And, that they need to work at some point to earn, not necessarily clean food, but like special food.
Yeah. So once in a while, the ribeyes at Town and Country go on sale, and I start to get spoiled. Yeah. I'm like, man, this isn't, these $8 a pound ribeyes are not reality.
No. But yeah.
So I'll grab a handful of them.
Oh yeah.
So I guess this wasn't really like publicly announced a lot, but I had originally said no real estate agents on this podcast. Yeah. And nothing against any real estate agents. I just
gonna have plenty against them.
It's in my, outside view, it's just a very saturated occupation, and it seems like it could almost be politics or religion. I met you, and the thing I just got, right off the bat is that you're providing so much value for people that are buying or potentially buying or selling even before the sale. And it really is very appealing to me. And that's a lot of what this whole podcast is providing value for the clients, for the community, relationships. you said your wife's got a background in psychology.
Yep.
And do you have a psychology background
Yeah.
as well?
Yeah. So I spent 10 years in the mental health world,
Okay.
working with young adults in addiction recovery. So I have that background as well. And my wife and I met in grad school for that clinical psych.
Cool. So that was like a long rounded question.
Yeah.
How does that background tie into real estate and what you do? Because I think you've got, in my opinion, which is whatever it is, to my opinion, uh, you've got a very unique and different approach than I've at least picked up outwardly from a lot of the real estate
Yeah.
agents I've dealt with. And how
Yeah.
how do you apply that to what you do?
You know, originally when I left that previous career in mental health, and there was kind of a couple jokes that came out of it. One was, oh, I went to grad school and got a wife out of it. You know, I'm no longer using that degree and all the time and money and spent on that. There was also the side of you know, the I lost where I was going there, but that that element of how. Oh, the other joke was that I'd spent 10 years trying not to become my father, even though he's my best friend, and then finally bite the bullet. And I think we eventually become our parents anyway. But is
that the Freud theory or no?
Oh yeah, there's elements of that. And you just see that and you see it historically. You see it biblically of, you know, sins of our father, all those types of things. It's like, it's just the human condition is nature, nurture, and those different elements. But on the real estate side, I always looked at, you know, there's some phrases around like, what are the most stressful events in life? And it's usually death, divorce, moving. Moving's always in the top 5 of most stressful events. And so I think there's an element that I've been very fortunate with where I spent 10 years in mental health, particularly young adults with addiction issues and coming out of treatment, from my own personal experience in that. And the unfortunate side to that is you get exposed to a lot of very dark and difficult things. And so the stress of a real estate transaction and moving a family, those types of things, doesn't really compare to the stress of, you know, somebody on their last chance of life and those kind of pieces. So I think there's a natural element of being able to remove emotion from the process, which doesn't really benefit anything. You know, on the cliche side of selling your house, like no one's going to pay for your memories. Your house isn't worth more because you raise your kids there, kind of thing. But also just like there's so many moving parts in a real estate transaction, particularly when you're selling your house to buy your next house, of how do you line all those things up? How do you manage 3 kids in a house, and their school schedules and those things? That initial psych perspective was just like, okay, how can we pull all those stress points out? Because it's going to be stressful no matter what. You're uprooting your life. But are there ways that we can build a process that outlines things so that we can get as much of that uncertainty and create as much clarity as possible so that people just really have to focus on the decisions that they have to make versus how do we do all these things? And I think in our industry, there's a lot of lack. There's so much transactional side of it that stuff just gets overlooked and skipped.
Yeah. How do you have a tough time with the stigma, as I just kind of revealed the real estate agent stigma?
I do. And our family does too, as 3rd generation in it. You know, I think that our industry deserves the reputation it has. And this is a whole rabbit hole of long, you know, National Association of Realtors, our trade organization is built that way. The barrier to entry is kept incredibly low. And that's purely because they know that they just want dues paid. And so they want as many members as possible. I think the board of NAR has like 2,400 board members. It's how do you get anything done? Like, so it's systemically broken in that sense on the agent side, in my opinion. Like, it always amazed me that you can spend 60 hours getting a license that actually teaches you nothing about what we do in the business and then go manage somebody's largest financial transaction. And I think a lot of people or a lot of agents potentially lose that perspective that we are, you know, a fiduciary and we are responsible for managing somebody's, you know, largest asset. And then you look, there are all these stats that compound that, you know, it's, what, two out of 10 people use the same agent to sell their house that they used to buy it. I think part of that is it's not relationship, it's transactional. People don't stay in touch. You have the average consumer that has 3 to 4 transactions in a lifetime. So a really long sales cycle. So they may never have the opportunity to have a good experience. And then you've got the selling sunset and all these image side of what real estate has become, of the pretty house and the TV shows and those types of things, which isn't really what we do at all. And I think most of those probably aren't even licensed agents. So
And you're asking, much more important questions. What do the finances look? How does this work for your kids? How does this work for you in 20 years? And
yep,
how does this work
yep.
today?
And that's part of the piece. Is I think that's part of that psych background, is how do we ask the right questions? Because my first perspective of a client is always, okay, why are they doing this? What is it solving for them? Is it solving a problem? Is it accomplishing a goal? Like, even I just met with a buyer for a buyer consult where we sat down, and I have an exercise where, in this case, husband and wife went through their wants and needs. The wants and needs are important. Obviously, we have to build the search that way, but I really want to know why on the background on each of those, because um, that's what really matters. Is not that they want to have an open kitchen. It's okay, well, what are you going to use that for? What does it matter? Because I can see a client walk into a house where they have all these, it's new, it's pretty. Maybe it doesn't have some of the key components that we had talked about originally. And my role is to bring that back up. Um, and it's not, if I talk people out of buying houses, I'll go out of business, but I want to make sure that they are not sidetracked by the pretty countertops or those types of things that can always be replaced or fixed, but that they're getting the structure and the core of the house that actually meets the problems that they're trying to solve.
So with your background in the clinical work, does a lot of that come from this? Just asking these right
Yeah.
questions to the people you worked with and kind of finding out the
Mm.
deeper answers to.
I think that's a big piece of it. And that's part of the fun piece for me too, is um, I really enjoy figuring out how people work, and how the brain works and how they tinker with things, and the process they use to solve their problems. And so that questioning, and that relationship building, and it allows me to dig into that. And so it still meets uh, some of the things I really enjoyed about being a clinician. And it's a very unique sales process, because there's not a lot of sales scenarios for consumers where you end up spending 3-4 months that intensely involved with somebody on the sales side. And that involves also so much of the personal life. Um, and you learn things about their kids and their family and their history and that kind of stuff. And so all those pieces play into it. Because at the end of the day, what they're buying typically is where a lot of those memories and those things are made. So I hold a lot of responsibility in the idea that um, I want to make sure that I can do everything I can to help them have a seamless process, but also that they're actually getting what they want and getting the thing that solves the issues that they've been facing in their current living situation. Like my first job at my family's brokerage in St. Louis was pre-internet. We had one of the old um, prior to the internet, you had to keep all, and still do, but you have to keep all your files for 7 years for every transaction and all your tax stuff. And part of my summer job was we had 3 offices, and I'd have to go to the basement of those and carry all the old files to the dumpster. And my dad tells a story about how, even as a, I don't know, 10-year-old or whatever it was, he would catch me down there going through the different sales. And because you could see okay, these 4 houses were available. And I was always curious, like, why did that family buy that house? Like, what did it solve when these 3 other in the same neighborhood were available? And I think that's the houses are a commodity, but at the same time, like, they are so unique to that individual family circumstances and why it works or it doesn't, from location to layout to features to all those different things. And at the end of the day, it's also their biggest opportunity to start to create, financial security. So there's so many elements that I really enjoy in it. So I try to treat it more as like there's the actual sales process, and then the client relationship that I have ongoing, which is I stay in touch, and I'm there to be that resource, much more like a financial planner and in those things for their largest asset.
I couldn't agree with you more on. I mean, I have such an interest in psychology myself. It's why I love doing this. I love, hearing people's motivations for what they're doing and why, and then pulling it back into my business and seeing how
Yeah.
it can can all relate.
Hmm.
Is there anything like specific to people that you've really learned, like when they're buying houses, that really sticks out?
So there's a couple things. I think one is one of the biggest patterns I see is people put off. Um, People create a lot of chaos for themselves. We naturally, as humans, we kick the can down the road. Anytime. Very rarely do we have situations where people identify a problem in themselves and immediately address it. We tend to wait until it causes them enough discomfort. And so one of the patterns that I see a lot is, you know, people do that in their house. They own a house, they've had their third kid, they've had whatever life things, because life drives the vast majority of real estate. And I'll get a phone call saying, we need to list the house now. When that idea to sell their house probably came up 6 months earlier, but they don't necessarily know where to start. They don't want to be sold to. There's all these reasons why they don't make that phone call initially. But like in so many areas of our life, we create our own stress. And starting that process a few months earlier, every little bit of time that you start earlier, makes that path so much easier. And so that's one of the patterns I see. One of the other patterns I see, particularly in couples, and in our families this way, it's my wife makes the decision on the house that we're buying. I make the decision on the selling side. And I think that's just um, a general pattern of, my wife uses the house different. She's with the kids in it a lot more, all that kind of stuff. I'd probably be happy with a decent bed in the garage kind of thing. As long as it checks a certain boxes, just being on the real estate side. But then the selling side is tends to be much more numbers game and those types of things. And so you can see those patterns play out. But as I show homes, one of the patterns that I see is, and where I kind of interject a lot with clients and where I'm able to dig into that on the front end on those questions too, is people walk into a house and they look at the visual side of it and all the aesthetics and those types of things. And they can be really, they start to lose track of what really matters to them. And so part of my role is kind of keeping them on that track of, does this really line up? Does this, does this house work how you've told me you're actually going to live in it, and how you currently, what the goals are with entertaining or those types of things. And for such a large purchase, it's also, fortunately now we have more time, but 5 years ago it was, you spent 15 minutes at the house and you wrote an offer in the car, and didn't have the opportunity to take a second look. And now we're in a market where we can go back and see the property two or three times to make sure that that decision is secure. So
It's funny. You're making me think of just when I signed the lease on this building,
yeah,
because I came here and looked at it, and it's easy to kind of get sidetracked.
yeah,
So I looked at it and I thought it was perfect because I looked at it, and then I was going away for a week and I'm like, let me think about this. Then I came back, drove by,
yeah.
looked at it again, really weighed the proximity to the airport, which is where we do so much business, and everything made sense. But in the past, even with leases and stuff, I don't know, if your emotions get the best of you,
Mm-hmm.
you'll make that decision quick, and you might not. It'll be kind of funny in hindsight. You're like, I didn't even think about that
Yeah.
and that. And
Yeah, one of the questions I always ask, and I always preface my clients with this, they know it's coming. I talk about it early on, and because it's never meant to be pressure. It's always, when I show a house that I know is the right fit, the clients act different. They start planning in it. They energy just changes, whatever that is. And so when we have that situation after the showing, I always ask, if this is no longer here tomorrow, and if it's gone, how are you going to feel about it? And it's never a push to sell that house. It's a gauge of urgency. Because if they're like, we really like it, it checks a lot of boxes, but we've got some questions, and it's like, okay, then we can step back, we can, slow down. Maybe sometimes you let the market make the decision for you. Like, how would you feel if somebody else wrote an offer tonight and it was gone? And if they're like, it'd be okay, we'd be bummed, but we'd get by, versus the response of like, we'd be really upset. And then it's like, okay, well, we need to sit down, let's go to the office, let's get numbers together and take action on it. Because you see it all the time. A house is on for 6 months and all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to sleep on it. And that offer comes in. And so gauging when it's right to act with urgency. Um, but yeah, you can walk into this office and you can see the nice shiplap walls and those types of things, and that can be shiny. But like being able to take that step back, because in my experience, if you took that week and it wasn't here when you got back,
Yeah.
there's probably a reason for it.
Mhm.
Like, and I've yet to see a client be um, disappointed with what they ended up with when they've missed out on something else. It's hard to see that in that time, but it's always worked out that way.
Yeah, and call it synchronicity or whatever you
Yeah,
want, but I kind of had that mindset. I said that I really think that'll work good. If it's not there, like then I'll like maybe that wasn't meant to work out, and there's
yeah,
something better. And I don't know. We never know like what the other option was or wasn't.
right.
So
And I've seen that time over time, and I've had conversations with clients too of just when they, because there's also that side of just natural, like it's hard to pull the trigger on that decision. So it may be the right house, and they've still got some reservation, and we need to figure that out. Um, and I've had it's hard for me to do, but because I never want to be salesy, I never want to be pushy. But there's been times where I would say it's like this is your opportunity, especially coming out of the market like we just had, where there was at one point where my client bought the only house that was less than $1 million in Bozeman proper. There was nothing else left. Um, and if they wanted to sit and think about that at that time for 3 days, it wouldn't have been there. So how do I gauge that? How much um, pressure, not in a negative way, of getting it clear that you may lose out on this opportunity, because I can see how it's the right fit. All these things, we need to figure out how do we work through any reservations you have and get answers to those things, but do it in a timeline that doesn't allow you to miss out if it ends up being the right one.
yeah, and I imagine that's a like balance of not being pushy, but
Right?
making sure they understand just
Yeah.
the nature of the situation.
Because like the one of the hardest things that the transactions internally that I had was a couple of years ago. It was right as the market had shifted, rates had started to go up, things had slowed down, and I had a client that had a piece of family history land. Their dad was a professor at MSU in the 60s and had bought several properties throughout the 60s and 70s. And this is also a good story of like the power of real estate. I think he total spent 30 grand on that, all these pieces of property. And the piece of property I had was that I was helping them with was 100 acres off of South 19th. Um, they'd originally gotten an appraisal for 7 million. That appraiser missed that they had no water rights, and that's a huge deal. And so the property was worth probably about 5 million at the time. Rates went up. After 6 months on the market, they got an offer for 4 million, significantly lower than what they originally thought. And their initial reaction was no way. But I knew that was like, there was new due diligence, like it was 30 days cash done. And so trying to figure out, have that conversation with them of like, we could be sitting here another 6 months from now and that offer's gone. And so we worked through it. And the way that I framed it was, if you take that money and invest it elsewhere, do you think the return on that money will beat the offer that we get 6 months from now in a declining market? And the last thing I wanted to do was come off as salesy as I'm just trying to get the deal done. But the reality is as we saw at that point, rates were now 5 and we saw them go all the way up to 7. If they had stayed on, they probably wouldn't have sold it, or they would have got an offer for 3 million. And so how do you get ahead of people, and their emotions on that side too, without just forcing the sale? At the end of the day, it's their decision. It's not mine. It's their land. They can do what they want with it. But part of my role is, how do I get them a clear picture of what's really taking place on the market and how that impacts their opportunities, and what can be done with it? Because if they hadn't taken that offer, they wouldn't have beaten it for sure.
Yeah. So what's the sequencing triangle?
Oh, okay. So that's been something interesting that I'm starting to kind of play with now, and really put out there. I spent the last, like, the clients that I really enjoy working with are those really kind of first time home sellers. I think there's a ton of resources out there for first time home buyers. You got all the guides and all that kind of stuff. I look at the first sale as the most difficult transaction when it comes to most real estate. And I see the most uncertainty, fear in clients around it of, do we buy first, sell first? Do we, how much equity do you have? Does that count as the down payment? How do we get access to that? If if we're buying and selling at the same time, like all these moving pieces. And then how do we manage life during this process too? And so I started looking back through like all the patterns for my clients, and this is that nerd psych side. And what I realized was we can build. There's three components that really matter in that. There's one, getting a really clear picture on how much equity you have, getting a real clear picture on what your financing looks like. And at the end of the day, the question on that is whether you're contingent upon the sale of your house or non-contingent. Can you go buy a house without having to sell yours? And then the third piece, the bottom of the triangle, is your timing. Part of that is your life timing, all the schedules, job, school, all that stuff. And then also the timing of Bozeman's market. We have we have very different micro markets within the year in Bozeman. And once you answer those three pieces and you know how much equity you have, and a very good estimate of that, when you know your financial parameters and on your lending, and then you know what your ideal timing is, that removes 90% of that front end stress that usually prevents people from starting. And once you have the answer to those three, it really creates those three pieces. That triangle really outlines your path and your options. In digging through it, it laid out, and I don't have it memorized yet, but it really laid out there are only 8 paths that come from that triangle based on the different combination of those pieces. And you get answer to those three, and this is your path. And now you have a timeline and you have a process, and we know exactly how it's going to work. And so all those questions are removed. And so then we move on to, okay, how do we get you prepared for that? And what does that punch list and those things look like to move down that path?
So it should give, myself or said client a much more clarity on the options they have and what they can do versus just having it all be vague.
Exactly. Yeah. Cause that's the thing I hear people put off. They're like, cause I got this comment from past clients of like, oh, if we had known that, we would have had this conversation earlier. Because you've got all the stuff in life that you're kicking around and dealing and working through on a day-to-day basis. You've got, everybody's uncomfortable with finances usually. And then you look at that, process because it's, oh, well, if we sell our house, are we going to end up homeless? Or if we buy the next house first, are we going to end up with 2 payments, and for how long? But that process of the sequencing triangle really breaks down the answers to those questions and outlines your specific scenario based on your inputs.
That's cool. For me, I'm thinking of the profit first. It's just the clarity.
Yeah.
The clarity to know what you can do and what you can't do. And it just, I think, as you were saying, so much of it's in our head. We just have all these ideas, this procrastination. We really don't have the clarity, but we're thinking worst case scenario. We're stressed out about it. But if you just get it out of your head and some of it on paper, you say, okay, here are my real actual options.
Yep. Any problem that you ever have, whether it's real estate or anything, it is 3 times as big in your head as it is in reality. And that was like, even on my side, like that, going back to that client with that land, when I took them on as a client and I was having the phone call where I was going to recommend a list price that was 2 million less than their previous, I went into that, like, I spent so many hours in prep and running through these different scenarios of how that conversation is going to go and what my responses would be for it and how to work through that to justify my lower price. And I got on the phone and we worked through it, and it was a 3-minute phone call. They're like, okay, cool. That makes sense. Like, but I'd spent so many hours in my head playing through this, and we do that with every problem. And when we have the opportunity to sit down and lay things out, once we actually lay them out, they're never nearly as daunting as our brain tells us they're going to be.
This was within the last week. I looked at myself in the mirror and I just had that quick come to Jesus moment where I'm like, I've been so up here worrying about things, and I'm like, they're not that big of a deal. It's just like, I need to get out of my head sometimes.
Yeah.
Stop over stressing about it.
100%. And I've also found that, like, when you surround yourself with good people, we have so many resources available to us to solve problems. And I think it's like that everywhere, but I think Bozeman's really unique in that. And I think the circles that we run in and some of the people that we have mutual relationships with, like, they will drop anything to help. And so even if we do have a big problem, like, we've got people to turn to. And I think those of us that are also willing to drop things to help people, we're also the last people to ask too. Like, we're always going to At least for myself, like I'm the last one to ask for help. Even though I know all these things, it's just how it is.
Yeah, and I grew up on a farm, and the mentality was you figure it out
Yep.
yourself. We really couldn't afford help in a lot of
Yep.
senses, and the amount of resources here, specifically in Bozeman, is incredible.
It's mind boggling. Yeah. Bozeman's such a cool, like little unique, like never in my life did I think I would have 3 friends that were blacksmiths. Like there's so many of these, like whether it's people just doing their thing or you want to look at it as small business or however you want to categorize it. But that's like the undercurrent of Bozeman that I don't think most people see is, um, I think on the out of state influx, you've got all the people that get the headlines, California, whatever, second home, those things, which there's there, but the vast majority of people, particularly in helping people move here, like 90% of the people that I work with in that situation is they're moving here like I did. They're taking some type of risk to create the life that they want. And I think being in and out of Bozeman for over 20 years, that pattern's always been there. And that's part of Montana's culture is like taking the risk and doing your thing and building your life. And to watch that and how that bleeds out into the friends that are a specialty mushroom farm or a blacksmith or a, um, you know, custom furniture maker, or these guys in shops like this that are just doing their thing. And women too doing that. It's pretty cool to be a spectator too.
I I couldn't agree more, and I say that all the time to my guys. We just had a meeting a couple of nights ago, and a lot of our business is referral based, and it's coming from other business owners like the people you said, and it
Mhm.
might be their clients. Their clients are flying in. You know, your client bought a house. Their client, you know, they're a concierge manager, so they're counting on us to make them look good.
Yeah.
And we're yeah, it might be maybe it is from somebody who's bought a second or third home here. Maybe that's great, but it's supporting all these local businesses, and
Mhm.
we're a part of that. So I get excited. I get fired up and
Yeah.
excited knowing about all those different businesses and knowing we're looked at as we're representing the whole state in these businesses when we're the
Yeah.
first people to pick them up at the airport.
Yep.
There's just so many cool businesses and things that people are doing. I mean, this whole podcast, I've got to meet so many cool
Yeah.
people, and it's just fun.
And I think on the negative side of what Bozeman's struggled with in its growth, and somebody that's not a Bozeman, you know, born and raised. I'm an outsider that's been in and out of Bozeman for a long, long time.
Shame on you.
Yeah, I know, right? But
Right
I
there with you.
we watched it grow up. We watched it growing up part time in Jackson. I remember as a kid in Jackson of dialing 4 digits for a phone number, and now the median sale price there is 8 million. Like there's an element of just not being able to keep special places secret, and it's the unfortunate side. But it's also like I also remember a time in Bozeman that our restaurants consisted of Olive Garden and that's it. And there was no, the food scene here is awesome now. And people don't complain about that. Like, so there's this double-edged sword to it. Because affordability is something I deal with on a daily basis at a spot that really matters. And it is a problem that we have to figure out. And the way we're going about affordability is completely against what I think will actually solve it. But Bozeman is no different than beachfront property. Like it is very few places in the country can you be in a spot where you can be in the mountains or on a river in 15 minutes and also be at Costco, um, or be X amount of minutes away from the park or Big Sky or those different types of components. We're in a very unique place, and the idea that we just get to keep it to ourselves isn't reality. Um, and I don't think it's because of a TV show or any of those types of things. It's because people want to be here, no different than any of us. And there's no way to really stop that.
Yeah, you can't want to have the best restaurants in town and then never have to wait and never
Right.
have to be in any traffic and then hope that that business can be successful.
Yep.
I had the thought all the time.
Yep.
What do you want? Access to everything and not another car in front of you to get there.
Yep. And
I,
and home prices are going to grow with that. Like it's tough. And, um, it's something that we really do have to address because I think we're getting a point as a nation, particularly, but also in Bozeman, where it's like, if you don't buy your first home, you may not have the opportunity to. Like, and I was joking with like, even, and you can't necessarily predict that. Like, I look back, we drove down to Jackson this summer and driving through Driggs and Tetonia and everything on that west side of the mountains on the Idaho side. I'm sitting there as a family that's was in Jackson starting in the 70s um, with my dad. And I'm sitting there, we know real estate, 3 generations. We know how it works. How did I not buy 1,000 acres in Driggs for $5,000? Yeah, like whatever it was 25 years ago. Like you just, nobody predicts how things are going to grow. And even with how special places like that, no one would have ever predicted Jackson's median sale price would be 8 million or ours would be just under 1 million. Um, but that's what happens when you get into places that people love and have unique characteristics. And, but we've got to figure out the ways to solve it, because even as you move out to Belgrade and Manhattan Three Forks, you know, there's affordability issues there. And Bozeman's biggest problem is that we don't have that secondary housing community that metros do and so forth, where, um, the old saying is you drive till you can buy. Like we just are starting to lose that, where, the general, let's say, for lack of a better term, working class and that kind of stuff doesn't have the ability to buy. And that's a big problem that we have to figure out.
Yeah, and it creates that weird dynamic where a lot of entry level positions now can't be filled. And
Yep.
what does that do to the community? And obviously, the remote work put a whole
Yep.
new dynamic on everything. That
Which Bozeman's had a ton of remote work even way prior to COVID, higher than normal. And part of that was our proximity to, um, Palo Alto and Seattle and that tech-based community, where you had plenty of people living here 3-4 days a week that would telecommute and then commute once a week. And so that's always been part of that thread. Um, but and I hate to say it, but the real solution to it is building, and the people that hate the growth, or are complaining about it and all those things and want it to stay the same generally are the same people that are really loud about affordability. But that's the solution, is supply and demand isn't going away here.
when you talk about first time home buyers, as far as financing and anything like that, do you try to find creative ways to finance? Do you have solutions? I know there's owner financing, there's different like stuff outside of traditional. Do you get into that realm, or advise anyone to go any direction?
Yeah, I have a couple of really good lenders that I work with. I think the first thing that on that first time, there's two things to kind of debunk on for that first time buyer. For whatever reason, there's this old standing idea that you need 20% down. You don't. On a conventional loan, you need as low as 3% down. On FHA or VA 0, but FHA is 3.5%. Like, so that barrier to entry on down payment isn't nearly as big as most people think. And I don't know
Correct me
why.
if I almost think that, did it used to be some like law or something?
It may have been, but
That's
not in the last 20 plus years.
okay. That's what I thought. People had thought that
Yeah,
like it used, but maybe it was just such a formality that
I think it's along the line. I can find out. But as long as the decade I've been in, it's never been that. And there was no period close to that on the prior to that I'm aware of that it was law. Now, banks would rather you have 20% down, you're less risky, but that's the vast majority of transactions, particularly first time home buyers. Let's say 150 transactions over the last 5 or 6 years. Uh, Very rarely on that first end side is it 20% down. The other side too, I think, in that this is a generational thing that I'm playing with of, um, I think as we've gone through these recent generations, there is this element of lack of work, or increased entitlement, those types of things where people want this shiny new product done. Um, and there's a mentality created that their first home should be their forever home. When you look back at traditionally in real estate, your first home gets you in the door and allows you to buy that big house or that dream house kind of deal. Very rarely is that what is bought off the bat, but there's some type of expectation now that your people don't want to buy fixer uppers anymore. And as a first time home buyer, that is your greatest opportunity, is buying that house that you're going to be in for 5 or 6 years and, doing some updates and adding some value to the property and increasing that equity, and then using that for that big purchase. Um, you know, and the reality is everybody kind of goes into it thinking that they're going to be in the house longer than they really are. Like it's oh, we'll be here 10 years. If it's your first home, you'll be there 3, 5. That's just the reality. Like we look at our situation, we never, because life happens, life changes. And that's the big component of real estate that a lot of people don't expect or understand is we can never predict what life's going to be. And we look at our situation. We didn't plan on moving to Bozeman. We just remodeled our kitchen. We just remodeled the master bath. And we were the idea to come to Bozeman came up when my contractor was finishing our kitchen while we were out of town. And the last thing you want to do is remodel a kitchen and sell the house right away because you're going to get 60% of that money back. And that just came out of nowhere. Same with like I bought a new car and then we found out we were having twins. And 6 months into having that car, I was like, oh, this thing's not going to work anymore because now I need 3 car seats in the back. Like life just changes those things, and that directly impacts real estate. And so I think that the biggest thing is having the right mindset as a first time home buyer. My advice in Bozeman, and obviously is if you don't own a home, figure out a way to buy one, because I think there's a window coming where you won't be able to. And a lot of the things that prevent us from buying are headlines, the thing we were talking about in our, the mental voice in our head, where it's just like sit down with a lender and find out what your options are, make it a goal. And the lenders I work with, they'll walk through your pattern and what you have going on financially, and they'll coach you and say, okay, you're not ready right now, but a year from now you can be if you do X, Y, and Z and fix this little bit of credit or pay off this little bit of debt. And they'll walk you to that path so that you're able to accomplish that.
And I think I saw an Instagram clip of you working with the woman. Her first name's Renee.
Yes.
But what's her last name?
Gogler.
So me and my fiance, probably when I jumped on a call with her about a year ago, cool. A friend of ours had referred, and she's awesome. Very helpful.
Yeah.
Just, walking through a lot of this stuff and what to do and where to go. As far as, do you do much or anything in that owner financing world or anything like that?
You see it. Usually my experience in it has been more with investor clients. People that, like I've got a client, my buddy Mike, that he's got a great story. He's a real estate investor. He's very successful now, has a ton of property throughout the country. But I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, he was a school administrator with nothing, and made a decision and has won in that sense. And so we look at a lot of creating financial situations because on that investment side, you can, particularly in the last couple of years with elevated rates, you need a unique situation for the traditional buyer to get into seller financing, because it's really it has to work for the seller, like, and finding that. Same with there's a product like FHA loans and VA loans have an option where you can assume them. So I had a client a year or so ago that we found a house that was an FHA loan. It was had 28 years left on the mortgage, but it was still a 3.5% or 4% loan. And they were able to transfer that loan to my client. His situation allowed him, though, you need to have the cash to make up the difference between the remaining loan balance and what the purchase price is. So you tend to have a lot of cash on hand to be able to do that. But there's ways to always look at that and at least ask those questions. And it's hard to be a buyer that is not able to get a loan and then start a search only looking for seller financing, because it's just such a rare opportunity.
And it's very specific. So you're not going to be being too picky, and it's going to be a one-off situation. Yeah. I'd imagine with the transfer, depending on the interest rate, that could be very advantageous, just because the rates are high now. And there was, I think my sister and brother-in-law bought their place in 20 or 21, and I think they're locked in under 2%.
Right.
I'm like,
we're at 3.
Yeah. It's like,
there's a bit of me. I'll never sell that house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had my Ford pickup truck I'd recently sold, and when I'd financed that, it was just about paid off, and it was under 2.
Yeah.
I'm like, man,
yeah,
I kind of want to keep it just because it's like so nice to have this rate on something.
Yeah. And that's what's a lot of what's been going on in our market is you've got people that are locked in that it's starting to free up a little bit, but they had a 3% rate. like we looked at our house. We bought a nice house in Four Corners. You know, we bought it a couple years ago for that in that mid to high 600s. Um, and we have a 3% rate and we've got like a $3,000 a month payment. I looked at it, if we bought it for the price that we bought it at the peak at when rates were like 7 1/8 last January, I ran those numbers. Our payment would have been, I think, close to $9,000.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for the same house, the
I was
same
going to say
price,
like
same.
45.
No, like that is exponential, and so that like it's a real problem, and I think rates will come down. I think we're finally getting into that trend. I think there will be a little bit more affordability um, going forward next year, and the market will free up some, but it's still it's a tough pill to swallow. But at the same time, I'm not a. It's always a good time to buy real estate. It's not that it is always a good time to buy real estate when your life lines up for it. Like your life's components are what drive that decision. It shouldn't be timing the market. I can't time the market, and I'm in it all day, every day, and in the data. Like it's no different than this idea of like when you play the stock market of like, oh, I wish I had bought Apple or Nvidia or whatever it is. Um, the likelihood that you picked that stock at the right time at the right market is next to zero. There's a reason why Warren Buffett in his um, I was just reading in his estate plan for his heirs. I'm pretty sure that there's a tie in the trust where their funds have to be in an index fund, because he's basically said that like none of you are me. You will never be able to time the market the way that I did. Let the market play its game and just get into the market. But your life has to line up and for the right scenario too.
Yeah, can you say that again? It's not always the right time to buy.
Yeah, it's not.
I just think it was very well said.
Yeah, I think it's the right time to buy real estate when your life lines up for it, and you have the goal of it. People get hurt in real estate when they over leverage themselves. So let's say they buy a house and then they take out a second mortgage on it to buy another house, and they've just got too much debt, or you just got bad timing in life. Like life things happen in a slower market, or you bought 2 years ago and now the job change or the divorce or whatever it is causes you to sell at a time that you weren't able to make anything on it. That's how people get hurt in real estate. Otherwise, on a long enough time horizon, if you're in that typical span, like you live in a house for 5 years, you're going to make money on it. It's just historically shown that our generation also has the context of 2008, which was a unique circumstance that we aren't in. Where there's headlines all over the place that the market's going to crash now. It's not going to. Like we've got too much demand. There's people think there's a ton of economic reasons why it's not going to happen. And I'd be willing to debate anybody on that. But everybody wants to, and the headlines are always going to click that stuff. And I think that gets into a lot of people's heads. And then they have all these questions of am I ready or not? But when you sit down and you do the work and say, okay, we have these goals, our life looks like this, and you get answers to those things, then it's the right time to buy. Not just because rates came down a little bit or because the market came down a little bit or it's going to go up. Like, good luck timing those things.
I'm almost smirking. I was at an event yesterday and this economist was giving his predictions.
Yeah.
And he said about 48% of the population is optimistic about the future. And I'm like, thanks. That's a very, you mean it's middle of the road?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But yeah, I really love that it's very contextual to your life and your situation, not just, and it's easy to get caught in those headlines, those YouTube sound bites, those Instagram clips that, buy now and maybe if I know you, I know who you are.
But there's a couple questions you can answer yourself of like, is my job stable? And, do I plan on living in Bozeman or whatever spot for, let's say 5 years? And, is that income steady in the point where I can afford that payment? Then it's like, yeah, take a serious look at it. Don't do it just because you should. Don't do it because you think that you're going to get a deal. Do it because you've got some security in what your life looks like, and that you're not overextending yourself. And then what are the goals of yourself or your family? What does that look like? do we want to have that space? Do we want to, be able to do our own things? Or if you don't want to buy, there's an argument for that too. Like I've got, somebody that in my life that they're semi-retired and they've owned a house here for a long time, and they've done well in the house, but it's a, 3-bed, 2 baths, 1,500 square foot house. It's nothing spectacular or special, but she's in a spot where she's traveling more. Like it may make sense to rent. You don't have to worry about anything if you're gone for 4 months. She can lock the door and walk away from it, and know that everything will be taken care of. So there's the right circumstance too for not buying. It all depends on what your life is set up like.
I don't know where I heard this, and this might be more of a, I guess, an old timer saying, but it's something along the lines of you only get maybe one shot or one swing at buying a house, or one or two big shots. Do you think there's any truth to that, or could you speak to that at all?
Um,
Kind of
in what
meaning,
kind of context?
I guess, in the context of, like you only get one time when you're this age, or you only get to take one shot at, financing $800,000. And
I don't necessarily fully agree with that. Like I look at our family, we bought our first house for 300 grand in Minnesota. As we actually bought it right before we got married. And then, I bought our second house now. I've been involved in other properties in investment and that type of side of things, but, I think you can look at it from the perspective of, you're going to have these periods of life. You kind of have that chance in that moment to get that best deal, maybe. But who's to say that that was the right time anyway? I think that's hard to pin down that you only get one shot, because, that one shot at that 2-year period may have been the right house at that right moment. But if you waited 2 years, that new house that you now have available with maybe more income or whatever it is, because it's having the mindset myself is like our trajectory is up. I've promised my wife that we're not going to rebuild our life again, start over from scratch, but who knows? Each year should get better and create more opportunity and more relationships and get exposed to more things. And so I think you get into the problem when you never take that shot. If you're never willing to step off that ledge, then you're always going to be sitting back. And that was our big decision. Our move back was like, at the end of the day, it was, what are we going to feel like 10 years from now if we don't do it? We're always going to be sitting there wondering what if. And that's one of those frameworks that a guy that I follow, Sal Frisella, that talks about, our context. Everybody says, what if? What if I ask the girl out and she says no? What if I try this and I fail? And it's like, that needs to be flipped on its head. Like, what if I do that and she says yes? What if I do take that risk and it turns out and changes my life entirely? There's an element there of taking that calculated step off the ledge that we have to do. And if we never do that, we're always going to be sitting there wondering.
I heard someone was interviewing Mark Manson, and they had quoted a friend went through bankruptcy, and he said, at some point in life, you realize the tightrope you're walking on is only a foot off the ground.
Yeah.
That's kind of the other side of it, but the same thing. You, like, as we were saying earlier, it's all in your head.
Yeah.
And then you realize, obviously, bankruptcy might be worst case scenario financially, but even that, you get through it. And
yeah,
I mean, that doesn't really reaffirm that you should take the chance, but
no, but it's like nobody that goes through bankruptcy planned on it. And that is the minority case of anybody that takes those risks turns into bankruptcy. When it comes to business, as we know, it's like the vast majority of business owners have failed at multiple businesses beforehand. But you had to learn those things and you had to go through those struggles to get to where you are now. Like it's playing the what if game of that is going to lead you to, in my opinion, a very unfulfilling life.
And you were saying you told your wife you're not going to rebuild your guys' life. So before I just solely did this Mountain Mule podcast, me and my buddy Kyle we were just interviewing friends, family, people in town. This is an evolution of it, but we'd noticed this common reoccurring theme. I noticed it in my life. And I'm curious how you notice this with your psychology background in that work. But for me, and what would come up a lot is like mid 20s to late 20s, at least for men, some women, but I think we probably interviewed more men than women. Is and the I guess the science is that's when your frontal lobe finishes developing. But because I essentially to my late 20s like rebuilt my entire life, moved across the country, had this one direction I was going to take my whole life. And do you see that a lot in people in your previous occupation now? And, and then do you see it, another evolution of it when they're, maybe, kids are going to move out. Your kids are
Yeah.
in the middle of, you're raising them right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, it's also a product of our system. Yeah. It's like we're, I don't know the stats on it, but at 18, you're tasked with deciding what you want to study and do for the rest of your life. Like, and I think I remember someone, it's like, I read that people will have like on average 6 different careers in their life or something, some number that seems crazy. But this idea that we're pigeonholed into this idea that we were coming out of high school as a young teenager and going to define what the next 80% of our life is absurd. And so I think you get that period of like, okay, we go to college, we do what we're supposed to do, we get our degree, that puts us into this path. We find out what that's really look like. We get exposed to all this other stuff, and then we get curious about those things and we move on. And so I think that late 20s, that there is a period where we kind of have a first defining moment. I think there's something that we fall into that people maybe don't break out of that because they're doing what they're supposed to. I know there's a lot of that kind of piece of, that same mental voice. Are we going to disappoint people? Is that wasted money leaving grad school? I had that experience and completely separating fields. But then you see it again too. I think there's the stereotypical midlife crisis and all those kind of things. And there are these different periods of our life where our life is defined by certain things, defined as a student, defined as a parent, and as those, when you move on from those stages, you're kind of left to rediscover what's next. And I think we do go through these evolutions. I look at it in my friend group, like there's the guys that I grew up with. I think we talked about this a little bit. They are incredibly good friends. My guys from St. Louis, still in touch. I look at the guys that I got sober with in my early 20s, and the life that I built in Minnesota around that event. And then my friends here, like, and each of those groups have exposed me to something different that has changed who I am and changed the path that I've gone on.
Yeah,
right? I haven't always been like this necessarily self-driven and business focused and all that kind of stuff. I've always enjoyed it, but it wasn't until I got to Bozeman that stuff really got gas poured on it and really became super interesting to me. So we can't predict where we're going to be and what we're going to do.
For me, it was really a death of an identity. I was essentially groomed, not directly by anyone, but I was going to run the family's farm. I'm the oldest son, and when I was almost trembling when I was saying to my girlfriend at the time, I don't want to do this anymore, and it like literally was like dying from the inside out. And it's fascinating to see where my life is now. I couldn't have imagined in a million years, but I couldn't be more excited.
Right. I think with each of those evolutions, as long as you're willing to step out and try those things, like you get exposed to what could be, and each of them gets tweaked each time. And I've always looked at like each relationship that's placed in my life. There's purpose in that. I was meant to be exposed to something, and some of those relationships are very brief and impactful. Some of them are passing, and some of them are lifelong friends. But I truly believe that there's purpose in each of that, to steer my life in a certain way. And I've seen it time and time again.
No, I can relate very much to my friends I grew up with, still good friends with some of them. I built a community group here at the martial arts gym.
Yeah.
And then in the last year or two, I've really, especially with this and with business, I've just leaned into my business, and I'm now building a stronger community of business. And you just see the different evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just in my buddy Ty's wedding this fall from the jiu-jitsu gym, and that'll be a lifelong friendship. Yeah. And it's also, it's like a step along the way of the evolution. It's very cool
Yeah.
to see it all.
I will tell you that it is a very odd experience rebuilding an entire friend group around at like 40. And like that, my friend group is like 25 to 60. Like it's
Mhm.
an odd thing, but that also, um, creates a really incredible experience because I'm not in the silo of stage of life. And I have people that I can go to that are 10 years down the road on parenting, and I can, somebody at 20 that knows internet marketing better than I do and social media better than I do, that I can go to them and pick their brain on it, because they see it in a different way, because they've just grown up with it. And so it's been very fortunate. Like one of the questions I always ask, like when I meet somebody that's been married 20, 30, 40 years, I always ask them for a piece of advice. We're 10 years in, um, and kind of building a life that way where it's, you get exposure to, that is the, in my opinion, cheat code to life is find people that have been further down the road than you. Like mentorship, like is worth its weight in gold. People that are willing to share, um, their mistakes and those problems, and some of those mistakes you have to go through. You got to learn from them, but at the same time, um, if you have an ability that you can either see them coming or you can avoid them, it's, and people want to share that stuff. It's like if you know, like I watch that in my sobriety a lot. Like it's there in that community, there's a huge element of leading people down that path when they need to change their life. And I will always answer that question. I will always answer that call because men did it for me and I wouldn't be here if they had it. So,
I want to ask you about the sobriety, but
mm,
you said 10 years into your marriage.
yep.
So I'm newly engaged, getting married
Yep.
next summer. So what advice do you have for me?
Two pieces. One on the actual wedding day. This was a piece of advice was, that day becomes a blur. And it's an incredible day. One of the things that we were advised to do that we did, not as much as we had planned on it, but we did it, was like try to set a timer every hour where you and your wife like just stand in the corner and watch. Like it's the only period in life that you'll have potentially all the people from those different pockets of your life together, and them
Kind of
overlapping and meeting.
like
It's
to these friend groups, like they're all
yeah,
going to be blended here.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's really the only experience of that. And so take a step back, and just watch for a minute with your spouse. And that was I think we did it maybe 2 times that night. Wish we'd done it more, but like that was really cool to see. From grandparents to grandkids to like all of that combination, and in college and business and high school, and it was, so that was like the good piece of advice we got on our wedding day. Also that no one will ever know if you picked the wrong fork,
Hmm.
um, like that kind of stuff.
I, I
That was a good piece of
I
advice
like
too.
that, and my fiance will like that too.
Yeah,
She's very intentional and good about stuff like that.
my wife wanted my input on the wedding. I didn't. This isn't the right way to say it, but I didn't really care. Like I cared about food, music. I didn't care about what the chairs looked like or colors or that kind of stuff. And my perspective was like, she's been dreaming about this day since she was a little girl. Like it's her day, kind of thing.
I keep sarcastically saying that to my buddies. I'm like, I've
Yeah.
been dreaming about this day
Right. Yeah.
since
Yeah.
I was a little girl.
Right. And the thing that we figured out, like, I remember we had an argument early on where she wanted me more involved in input. And I'm like, I don't have input to give. I don't know. I've never looked at this stuff. I don't think about this stuff. And what we figured out was if she gave me 3 options, I could give her at least one no. And that was enough for her for my input where she could say, hey, here are the 3 tablecloths. And I'd be like, not that one. And that saved a lot of stress in that planning process. At 10 years in, um,
I'm making notes.
absolutely. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
actually meeting with the owner of a wedding venue, a couple of weeks ago, and about their social media. One of their staff had some questions for me now that I've started doing that, a lot more of that. And that was like we came up with that idea of like, they should interview all of their clients afterwards of like, what was the thing that saved you from arguments while you're planning your wedding, and figuring out that and doing social media around that. I thought was a really good idea. On the 10 years, it's actually a piece of advice that I got, from a guy that I've been married 30, 40 years that I met at a cigar lounge that I belonged to, was neither you or your spouse will be the same person that you married. Um, and having the room to accept that. I can tell you now that I am not the same guy that, morally and as at my core I am, but we grow, we change. And part of marriage is having the space to, um, accept that and support that and, um, watch the spouse that you have chosen to spend your life with, go through those evolutions and support it. And like one of the rules of our marriage, my wife and I don't say no to each other. Um, we reserve no to it being something very strong. So when she wants to, whether that's going out with her friends or me going out, or whether that's like, um, I want to try this new thing, or make this a goal. Like we figure out how to support it with Lauren's endurance racing and all that stuff. Like she was fortunate to a little over a year ago she qualified for, or 2 years ago she qualified for last fall, where she got to she got an amateur slot in the World Championships for Ironman, and that was a
That's
bucket list.
badass.
Yeah, she's way cooler than I am. I don't know why she picked me, but she she called me. She was in Tennessee. That was the first race that I hadn't attended because we had the kids and all that kind of stuff. And she called me and she's like, I got offered a slot. It's in Nice, France. We're in the middle of the rebuild. We don't have the money to do that, but it's like, yes, we'll figure it out. Like, and for me, like I volunteer with Big Sky Bravery, and that takes, I do 1 to 2 trips a year where I'm gone for a week. And I sent her dates. Like I've got a trip in end of January, and now we just got offered some summer dates. And so I sent her those dates, and her answer is yes. Like we reserve saying no to each other when it really matters. And we support and try to figure out how to help each other accomplish those things, or do those meaningful things that matter to them. But if like the little things on her week to week, she's got a couple of wives in the neighborhood that she's close with that they take walks all the time at night. And she's always asked, and it's like, yes, like I think marriages get into problems when we start setting expectations, um, and limiting what we're able to do. Now, if I was to send her dates and she was to say, no, this is really a problem for XYZ. Now I know based on our history that there's something that really matters to her that I'm stepping on. And so it just kind of sets that tone.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
I think it's very good advice. I get excited when I hear you say that about, not going to be the same person in 10 years. Me and my fiance really, a lot of our relationship was started on, or has evolved and started on a lot of change and us evolving. And we just have that relationship of we're always in a positive, healthy way. In my opinion, we're just like, we're seeing this evolution in ourselves and where we've come since we met. And it's a foundation that we realize it's not a good thing if we're the same person in a couple of years. And we see those old negative patterns and positive ones that make us who we are and also might hold us back. So for us, it's fun, but I don't know. I feel the fear too of, oh man, what if like, this is the person I fell in love with. What if it's not the same person? That's kind of the point.
I have found that looking back on it in 10 years, it's like, I fell in love with the core of who she is. And I find that tends to not change. Who you're raised as and what's important to you and what matters on the moral sense and the life view and those types of things. I think that stuff stays pretty concrete, but we get distracted by, I think we can forget that over time, and be distracted by the other elements that do change. Kind of back on the saying no thing too. It's like, I'm so incredibly fortunate that that's how she treats my business. Like we've figured out that like her endurance race stuff, she doesn't have an off switch. Like she can grind. Like the amount of times that I've watched her on her trainer, or not watched her, but she sat in the basement for 4 hours on a bike during the winter and has the ability to do that. Or I'll just skip it. That's how I am in business, and we support each other in that. So it's like coming here this morning, it's like chaos, and our mornings are chaos right now, getting the 3 boys ready and out the door and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you for making the
Absolutely.
time to be here.
No, thank you. But it's like when I told her that I was going to have to leave a little bit earlier than I normally do and that kind of stuff, it was a yes. But I also don't take it lightly that means I'm putting more on her. And so just having that perspective of the day-to-day life in our marriage, prevents a lot of issues, and it prevents a lot of resentment, and allows for a lot of open communication, which is the core of it. We both know where we stand.
Yeah.
You know?
When you said that, you fell in love with the core of who she is. I think with my fiance, this is kind of crazy. We were talking about baseball earlier.
Yeah.
Since we've been together and now to date, this is weird, not to get too sappy, but there's just different piece in my life. And I've started watching so much more baseball and following it. And that's what I did when I was a young kid, kind of before the chaos of life took over.
Yeah.
And I look at that now and I notice it in hindsight. And I'm like, there's something at the core that kind of reminds me of that peace and comfort that I had when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the stability.
Yeah.
And it's very cool to see things like that. And I think that's more in the core of who she is. It's not her necessarily like little traits and things and interests at the time.
Yeah. And it's be happy.
Yeah.
I think there's so much of that element, particularly as men, and women deal with this too, of like putting on this image of what we're supposed to be, and it's like you build connection by about being real and who you are and what matters, and those little stories. Like we connected on because we both grew up in families that love baseball, and I have like the childhood memories of hearing Jack Buck, on KMOX in St. Louis on the radio at all times. Like nothing will ever change that or replace that, and that will immediately bring me back to that childhood stuff and time with my dad and time with my mom and going to those games and all that stuff. So
I recently said to my fiance, because the Mets have a pretty iconic broadcast team that they were like part of the '86 team, the championship team, and she's like, "Oh, is that Ron or Keith talking?" And I was like, "Our love is based on how well you know the Mets broadcasters."
Yeah.
But I listened to them growing up, and hearing the stories about them, and it's just it's very cool because it's that connection.
Well, in that same way, I could my wife, she's from Chicago, and as we talked about, she's a North Sider, and so Cards Cubs, big rivalry, and like in the first couple of years of that first dating period before we were engaged and that kind of stuff, she knew all the Cardinals players, and part of it was. She did that because I cared so much about it, like, and finding those things but she's not a baseball fan. She's a big Bears fan and football fan, but like, she's never sat down on her own and watched a game of baseball in her life. And that would probably be at the very bottom of her list of things to do. But she knew it was important to me. And there are plenty of things that she cares about that I don't, but putting that effort in and time to like, identify when it matters to them, put some thought into it.
Yeah. And you literally just described my fiance, because she's like, I don't like, and her father, is a baseball fan. She really wasn't. She's like, I want to you like this, so I'm interested in this.
Yeah. And
she, I grew up on a farm and we have 2 horses and we ride. She loves horses. I enjoy it, but I'm like, I'm here for you. Like, she'll tell me interesting stuff about them and I'll help her with projects. And I'm interested in it because I know how happy it makes her. And she's the exact same with the baseball for me.
Yeah. Another piece of advice that was actually from my sister. And on the just general relationship, whether marriage or not, was, men and women are different. Men want to solve problems. And this is stereotypically speaking, and some of the psych background too. Men and women just work differently. Men want to figure out a solution to the problem when we're facing it. Women want to figure out that solution too, but they want to talk through it. And my sister advised me that when my wife, I think this was before Lauren was even in the picture. It was, when you're dating somebody or when you're getting married, and that person is having a problem, ask them whether they want to solve it or talk about it. Because I think as men, it's like, oh, we solve it and then we don't have to talk about it. That checks our box. But there are times where it's like, I can ask that question to Lauren and she's like, I just want to talk through it. And it's like, okay, then I'll listen. And versus me just being a dude and stepping in and be like, well, let's do X, Y, and Z and we're done with it. That's a problem for her. That doesn't solve her things. And so that was a really good piece of advice from my sister too, of just ask that simple question of, hey, what are we doing here? What are your expectations? Do we want to solve this or do we want to talk through it? And that
really
has saved
good.
A lot of arguments. I'm sure it has.
My fiance Amy's really good about, she says to me, and I'm working to be better at about it with her, but she'll say, do you want advice on this, or are you just venting stuff?
Yep.
and because there's times when I'm just trying to like, bitch about something and then
Yep.
let it be. And then sometimes like, well, hey, do you want me to help you? So she'll ask for
That's
the
great.
context, and she'll even give the context sometimes before she says something.
Yeah.
She's like, can I just tell you about something? Like, yeah, she just wants she wants someone to hear it.
Yep.
And there's a lot of nuance there.
Yeah. And that probably prevents a lot of discord in the household over a long period of time. So
That's good stuff. I got some notes here.
yeah.
The sobriety, what was that journey like? And does
Ooh,
that all, I mean, I'm obviously it all ties into who you are and where
yeah.
you are now. So
It's a core piece, and it's something I share about very openly, just because, uh, in my perspective, there isn't a person that isn't touched by addiction. Um, and as someone myself that, um, no one would ever look at me and be like, "Oh, you were an alcoholic," kind of piece. Because there's so many like stereotypical sides. It's like a homeless or gutter drunk, that kind of stuff. When the vast majority of those that deal with addiction, it does not look that way, and you would never look at them and say it. Um, and then I feel I have an obligation to speak about it because my phone's always on for it. There were the the successes of sobriety are not shared enough, which then removes hope that it actually can be something that is worked through. Um, so for me, it was one of those elements of just, um, part of that kind of voice that we were talking about of that, uh, for lack of a better term, insecurity. When I smoked weed for the first time or drank for the first time as a teenager, young teenager, like that insecurity went away. And we got a long family history of alcoholism, good Irish family. Um, but yeah, it was partied through high school, all that kind of stuff. Moved out to Bozeman for college. Worked in restaurants and did all those things and ski bum and just couldn't stop. And had a series of events that took place and that led me, got in some trouble, ignored that trouble, and was very fortunate to be in a unique situation where uh, my dad and I were having lunch. I knew that I had a problem, but was kicking the can down the road. Knew I'd been trying to stop drinking for a long time and couldn't. My dad had come up from Jackson. We were having lunch, and I told him I had done great in school. And my econ professor sat down at the table next to us and was like, "Hey, Matt, where'd you go this semester? You were doing so well." And I just stopped going. But I literally, like 10 minutes earlier or 3 minutes earlier, told my dad I got an A in the class. So like pulled the rug out. But the big thing was that's how I ended up moving to Minnesota. Was I was very fortunate. My dad kind of pulled me out of Bozeman in that moment. And I went and lived with him for about a week or 10 days in Jackson. Um, and got introduced to a sobriety community there, and then was given the opportunity to go to treatment, which led me to Minnesota, where I lived for 15 years. Um, the the piece that I always kind of just as a general sense of it is, um, we all are touched by addiction, whether it's aunt, uncle, loved one, friend, whatever it is. There is way more resources for help than people realize. Um, and there's way more people that have had success in it than people realize. And those people that do have success in it are always willing to share. Like I will never tell somebody what to do. I'll share what worked for me. And that's the only experience I have. But my path mirrors what kind of everybody else that has had success in it too. So
yeah, that I like a little bit of background to give context to it. When I was pretty young, my father passed away.
hmm,
I had some like great people that were mentors that worked on the farm and essentially helped raise me alongside my mother.
yeah,
And they were like just very straight edge, like did not drink, did not do anything, and was very much, passed to me.
yeah,
And I swear, because I've had like on and off chewed nicotine,
yeah,
all that stuff, but I felt all the tendencies there. And I feel like I can really understand addiction in a way.
hmm,
And really just nicotine has been like the thing that I'd battled with and food. But I'm like, man, if I didn't have those people there, like I could be on a street corner somewhere because
yeah,
like all the pulls to, deal with the stuff I'd gone through, losing my father and the trauma. And
yep,
I feel like I can really relate, when people talk about being addicted, I'm like, look, I get it. Like I feel like by the grace of God, I just got aligned with the right people.
Yeah.
But I think every other tendency was there, and the stage was set for that. So
Yeah. No, and it's like, I look at, there's so many components, and whether it's my own personal experience or it's the clinical, you know, education, all those pieces, and that component of it, of like, addiction is one of those things that doesn't make any rhyme or reason. Yeah. Sometimes you got family history, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you've got it. You've got people that go have a surgery and, become physically dependent on a narcotic for pain relief or whatever it is. And they get off and they're just perfectly fine. And you got others that it flips the switch and their life runs off the rails. Like, so there's no, there's an element of like Russian roulette to it. For me, it was very apparent in my behaviors at a very young age of just, it's no different than my business. Like, I have that trigger. But like, for me, it was like all the insecurity and angst and all that kind of stuff as I think I smoked pot for the first time at 13. And the first time I did that, like, that was all gone. I was like, and my immediate thought was like, oh, I'm doing this for the rest of my life. And that led to that path. And then got to a point where, um, even no matter how much I tried not to, like the mental, the consumption of thought and time around, I'm not going to do this, and then not being able to turn it off. I was very fortunate that like I never went down the road of like major trouble and like theft or that kind of stuff. And then, and so I didn't create a huge wake in that sense, but, I was also very fortunate at 22 to have some people put in front of me, and have God put in front of me in a way that, kind of almost didn't give me another option other than to get sober. And then very, as I was talking about, like the stress of real estate and how that doesn't compare, even though it's a stressful event. Of like, my first 18 months of sobriety, I think I buried 11 people that got sober with me. Like,
okay.
there's one outcome when it comes to that. And for whatever reason, I was able to see that. And there's a big piece of addiction where people getting sober, it's like, oh, I got to do it my own way. I'm not going to follow this advice. There's a weird component to the typical personality of an addict that I somehow, didn't have. But we talk about friend groups, like tying these pieces together. It's um, like the chances of success are very slim. But I know, I got out of treatment, lived in a sober house, which, lack of a better term, halfway house, single family home. That's what that first business I was involved in, was. And we had 8 guys going to meetings, reintegrating into life, all that kind of stuff. And I think like 5 or 6 out of the 8 guys, we all had 20 years this year, or long term. Maybe somebody had to slip up at some point in time, but, those odds are rare, and that is unheard of. And that is not because of me. Like, God had a purpose in that, because when you're 22, there aren't a lot of 22-year-old getting sober. So you find your people and you band together. My buddy Pete, I was talking to him. We've been going back and forth and trying to line up a Zoom call to catch up. He lives down in Denver. And we look at these relationships, that were built on something, really powerful, when we may have not been friends otherwise, because that friend group is like the oddest group of characters, because we all different walks of life. And we probably wouldn't have hung out otherwise, but we changed our lives together and have our lives today because of that. So
Yeah, I can totally relate with my MMA friend group,
yeah.
because we're such misfits, but we all got addicted to that.
Yeah.
And it was because it could have been something terrible.
Yeah.
But we got addicted to, struggling together. And that's like that bond of that group is, and I just think of that, like, once in a while I might have a beer, but fortunately for me, it has these pretty negative consequences right away. Like, within the next couple of days, I just feel like shit. But it's that pull, that dopamine, and kind of that relief. Like, your insecurities, and you're like, man, I feel better. I don't. And like, being a kid growing up, dealing with losing my father, it's relief.
Yeah.
To feel that relief of not feeling that. And in that level, I can just, I'm very empathetic and sympathetic to people that are
Hmm.
addicted. Like, yeah, like it's what most people would do if they felt that way and they found
Yeah.
relief.
And that's the tough part about it, because like you look at my situation, excuse me, like grew up in a very strong, good family, successful family. Um, like you look at my high school, was captain of the basketball team, won state, dated the captain of the cheerleading squad, like was the popular kid. Like, so everything on paper looks great. Internally, um, like I never understood why. Like I always felt the outsider. I always felt that something was different, and I had no tragic event growing up. Like tragedy does lead to addiction, but also there's just an element of like that was just ingrained. Like there was something in there, and like nobody would have ever guessed that that would have been the outcome. But for some reason it did. Like I always felt my friends were closer to each other than I was to them, or whatever it was, in these stories and ideas in my mind. And as soon as I took that first drink and that first smoking weed, that all went away, and I felt normal. Um, and then the problem with addiction is like, everybody gets some relief from taking a drink or whatever it is, whether it's stress or, just even those that don't struggle with drinking. But with addiction, at some point you cross a line, but that line's invisible. And once you've crossed it, there's no going back. And I have no idea when I crossed mine, but sometimes it's the first time, sometimes it's 2 years in. But it's also, addiction's weird too, because it's like I mentored a guy in sobriety that he didn't drink every day. He had drank 5 times in 10 years, but he had 5 DUIs. So it's like on the addiction side, it's not necessarily how much you drink or use or whatever it is. It's, are you who you want to be when you do? And what happens when you do? Now, if like, let's say I didn't drink every day, but every time I drank, I went home and beat my wife, and maybe that was once every 3 years, that's probably a drinking problem. It's not necessarily just that you can't stop drinking. It's, are you able to be the man or the woman that you want to be and who you are at your core when you do that? And if you choose to keep drinking despite knowing that, then it's probably got some problematic tendencies that you got to look at.
Yeah, and some people, just have a beer now and then, and they're fine, and like, great,
100%.
more power to
Yep.
you. And
We've got booze in our house,
yeah,
and my wife's sober too. We figured it out on our first date, like totally random kind of thing. We had ideas in grad school that we both were, but um, there was no intention. Like we didn't go on our date because we were both sober. But it's, um, the perspective of sobriety on life and what I look at today, it's like we've got booze in our house. We don't, like, 90% of my friends here drink, and like it's not, I go anywhere and do anything I want to do. Like the part that has been given to me in sobriety is that it's given me the power of choice.
mm,
Um, when I was drinking, I didn't have a choice. I had to, and I had to go down that path. And today, I live a life where I get to choose what I want to do. And I'm not constrained by that. And I don't have something that's holding power or controlling over me. And, um, I do find that like when I'm out with buddies, if we're out late, like it gets to 10:30, 11, everybody's had some drinks and people just kind of get annoying. And if I'm the sober guy, like the last thing I want to do is hear the story the third time or get poked in the belly or, like
yeah,
whatever, like handsy feely, like, just that what booze does. But it's like, if I could drink successfully, I would. I know for sure that if I could smoke weed still, I would. But if I smoke weed, I can't do laundry. I can't brush my teeth. I can't, like, all personal responsibility goes out the window and I don't do anything else. And I tested enough over those, 8 years that I did to uh, do the research that I don't have that off switch once I ingest it. It's
I think it can be fun if you're good at it, and you got to know if you're good at it.
it,
Just know
yeah,
yourself.
yeah, and it's because there was a long time too of like, maybe I was just young and failure to launch and that whole kind of mentality, and it's like young, mature, didn't have any willpower, all that kind of stuff. And I look at it today, and it's like, I'm a cigar guy. I belong to a cigar lounge in town, and it's something that my dad and I've always shared, and something I enjoy, and I love. And it's not the cigar; it's what takes place around the cigar. It's the conversation. It's the proverbial fire pit kind of thing. Um, And like a lot of people drink bourbon or whiskey with cigars, and I'll drink iced tea or coffee or whatever it is. And every once in a while enters my mind, it's like, would I enjoy that cigar more with a glass of bourbon? And there's just the rational perspective of it now. It's like adding alcohol or weed back into my life wouldn't provide me any benefit. Like it wouldn't improve my life in any way. So why would I now risk kids, successful business, X, Y, and Z just to see if I could
Yeah.
try something that wouldn't add any value? But then that also reinforces in my mind that like 20 years later, the fact that I'm still thinking about it, it's like, oh yeah, you're probably not going, you know? So
I'm glad that you brought up too that because I could look at my situation and be like, I dealt with this tragedy as a kid.
mhm,
It may have created all those tendencies, but there's like, we're so nuanced as humans as you might have this outwardly picture perfect life and that doesn't explain why you feel the way you do inside and how your genetics react to things. And so it's not just to somebody that can look really clearly at why that may or may not be there. So
yeah.
it's just the nuance in humans, I'm sure, as you know, given your previous occupation and your current, it varies widely.
Yeah, and I spend my time in a profession that is very materialistic and image driven. Like there's always that piece of like, okay, if you're driving up to handle somebody's largest financial transaction in a beat up, rust up car, like what are they going to think of you? Like there is that element, and which is unfortunate, but the so much of that stuff, whether it's through insecurities and sobriety or whether it's through business and money and all the things that we talked about today, like that image. It's like I know I oftentimes present very well, um, and can come across that I have no problems in life, um, and I can tell you that we all deal with stuff, and what is a problem for somebody may not be a problem for somebody else, and that's not for us to judge. Um, the only thing I venture into the area of judging is if we're not willing to do anything about it. Just because I look at my life and the people in my life that we've all faced difficult things, and we've the people that I like to surround myself with are the people that choose to do something about it and take action on it. And and it's not my place to say whether that's right or wrong, but I know that that's what I want to be around.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. Like, I know it'll be a help to a lot of people, and like the more I've shared with people, it just seems to bring me closer to them and just
Yeah,
closer to everyone.
100%. I think we talked about this the other day of just, I think there is a general trend, particularly that has had gas poured on it due to social media and all those kind of things of like, people want real. People don't want surface level anymore. And, um, we're constantly bombarded by how great everybody's life is. And that's just not true. Like we look at our family and it's, um, whether it's the sobriety stuff in our background or whether like we've had difficult stages of life, like, we went through a period where as we were going to get married, my mom, the other thing I'll mention too, just I like to be a resource for people. So I'll mention on the sobriety piece, like my phone is always on. It doesn't matter what time of night. If somebody needs help, if somebody has questions about it, I will always answer that call. Same goes to pancreatic cancer. That's what I lost my mom of 10 years ago. And she had a brief 6-week period battle from diagnosis to her passing away, which led her passing away a month before our wedding. Um, and like, so we've had these series of events in our life where we just, I guess, get bad cards. But there's always hope that, in my opinion, if you allow yourself to take some action on it and do something about it and try to figure it out and try to work through it and don't retreat into yourself, and share those things with people and talk about it. That's that tide that like we all have those experiences in a different way. And that for me is what creates the fun in real relationships is talking about what life really is and not just everything's great and had a good quarter and we're going on this vacation and yada, yada, yada. It's talk about what's real. And I think people are craving that today. And, um, but it's then that voice in our head of like, oh, we can be judged or yeah, that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, I could not agree more. I appreciate you being here and being real.
absolutely.
I'm beta testing I was trying to find some way to have my guests be interactive with each other and kind of like going off a diary CEO or something.
Mm-hmm.
So first it was a quote, but then I turned it into a question. So good friend of mine, Foster Mobley, he was the last guest on. So he left a question that is for the next guest, which is you.
Okay.
It says,
That's cool.
and it's a quote. This quote says, "Tell me, what do you plan to do with this one wild and precious life?"
Whew. That's tough. That's a good question.
He said it's a question quote, and I think he said Mary Oliver phrased it as a question.
Okay. Because it's like my head immediately goes to different pieces. It's like, what do I put here for? And like when it comes to like my kids or to business or like, I think it seems so generic, but it's like to have an impact that's lasting, like legacy in that sense. Did you say it again?
Yeah, yep. I'll read it again. Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life.
It's like you can go out to the limb of like, oh, I want to change the world and yada yada yada. Like as we've talked through this and being on the spot with that question, like the thing that kind of comes to mind is that like just the general phrase of like show that it can be done. Like I look at that through like raising 3 boys and the example that my wife and I set for them of we're doing hard things every day, whether it's her workouts or it's my work or, those kind of things of like setting those examples and showing that it can be done. The element of our move of like, take the risk. Yeah. The element of sobriety of, so that you can beat it. And so I think I would have to say that I'd want to live a life showing that it can be done. And incorporating all those different components of what life really is. And experiencing that and, um, celebrating that and persevering through those things and all those different events. And at the end of the day, showing to the people that I care about that hopefully I can be an example that you can work through and get through and accomplish things that you want to do.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
From the time I've gotten to know you, it looks like you are. So
trying to.
Yeah. Matt, if people want to find you, where can they find you? If they want to ask you about real estate, sobriety, any of the things.
Yeah. On the sobriety side or like any of that stuff, my phone number, 406-579-4432, but also my Instagram. That's been a goal. Like I have, as we talked about a little bit on that front end of our industry, like there's also an element that I think social media is such a good tool to get information out, and trying to do that a little bit different and bring my flavor of real estate to that. So a lot of education and content of just trying to help people, and work through process and create some of that clarity versus just like, I don't post, very rarely do I post any like just solds, just listed or market stats. It's not about that. It's about how real estate really works in people's lives. And I think that's MattRyan.Bozeman Real Estate on the Instagram. And that's the big goal, is to continue to put content out there where it actually helps people solve their problems and how to look at real estate and why it matters to put your house in a trust and those types of things of creating clarity and value in that world versus just showing another pretty house. Okay.
Well, I'm going to link everything, and I appreciate what you're doing. This has been a blast, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, man. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening, folks. You can find the full blog post for every episode along with key takeaways and links at mountain-mule.com. If you haven't yet, consider following the show. That one small action helps these Montana businesses get seen, grow, and thrive, and it helps this podcast keep going too. If you know a business that would be a good fit for the show, we'd love to hear from you. Just reach out through the website or social. Thank you for supporting these Montana businesses. See you on the next show.